It's back. He has two back. He's done it. Sharma has done it. And the delirious.
Hello and welcome to The Last Wicket, a cricket podcast that you didn't realize you needed. I'm your host, Benny, and I'm joined by a few friends, Mayank,
Hey everyone.
Nish,
How's it going, people?
and Himanish.
Hey guys.
And this week, we will be attempting to answer the question, does the umpire's call in DRS have any merit? Does it raise more issues than solve them? How does it actually work? All right, those are actually multiple questions, but we'll attempt to answer them all. And then later in the episode, we're going to take a look around and see what else is happening in the big, crazy world of cricket. Apparently, tours are being canceled at the last minute. Players continue to get freak injuries, and there are dream debuts for West Indian batsmen. And your hosts here will share their thoughts on all of those. But first, let me check in with my team. Nish, how has your week been?
It's been productive, busy, and of course exciting with the Indian Test match restarting.
Okay, I don't know if you would call that exciting, but what about you, Mike?
Similar for me. It's been kind of really hectic at work, and then we're staying up late at night watching the game, so that obviously doesn't help. But it's what we sort of accepted as Indian cricket fans sitting in the US. So
Yeah, I miss.
Not gonna complain at one game after Brisbane.
Yeah, I missed the Australia tour already just for that reason because it was more reasonable hours for us.
Oh,
but
yeah.
now we have to stay up, late into the night just to watch this test match. What about you, Himanish? How has your week been?
Same. It's been a lot of research. Research has picked up pace. Teaching has picked up pace. I teach astronomy to a bunch of undergrad kids, so that's picked up pace. But my sleep cycle is screwed because of the test match. So I'm trying to juggle those two things, and I'm trying to combat my advisor at the same time and do some research. Yeah.
Is cricket like a step down for you from astronomy?
In terms of what?
Just in terms of understanding all the different intricacies of the game and.
I mean, yeah, it's a little easier to understand, but that being said, it's still like very complex. And there's a lot of information that we don't have in the public domain because we don't play it as professionals. So there's a lot of lag between the information we have and the information that actually goes into playing the game. So it's as complex, but yeah, theoretical physics definitely. I'd be lying if I said it wasn't more complex than cricket.
So
But
as an expert, you can definitely say cricket is not rocket science.
It's not.
Nish,
We
did
often
you have to say
overcomplicate it.
Yeah, I was just going to add some humor here and ask Himanish, is there a universe in where Rohit Sharma is not mocked as purely talented batsman and given credit for his performance?
I'll have to run simulations of such a universe and I'll get back to you.
It's very possible, guys.
Because I run simulations. One of them is running right now, and I can tweak it to include Rohit Sharma and then see how it goes.
There's probably an alternate timeline where that's possible.
Yeah.
Nish. Well, my week was pretty decent. I got the second dose of the COVID vaccine on Thursday.
Oh,
And
cool.
Yeah,
Awesome.
surprisingly did well. Unlike some of my colleagues, I did not get, fever, joint pain, or any other such nice things after the shot. But to make up for those lack of side effects, I got a headache from just watching Joe Root and company pile on the runs against India over the weekend. But as Michael Vaughan says, #on. All right, let's get to it. Our main segment this week is a heavy hitter. It's one of those topics that elicits strong reactions from both casual and seasoned observers of the game. The decision review system, or more popularly known as DRS, is a system that solely exists to assist on-field umpires in cricket to resolve disputed calls. Now, whether it does that in a manner that is satisfactory to everyone is another question. Then there's the umpire's call, a tacit acknowledgement that even technology has its limitations, especially when it comes to LBWs. And this is a high-level topic that many experts of all caliber have attempted to explain. And here at The Last Wicket, we are going to take a shot at it and see if we can make sense of it all. So let's start with the basics. Mayank, can you explain to us the context of how DRS and then later umpire's call came about? What is this technology supposed to address?
Sure. So I think at the end of the day, over the years, while umpiring has been improved and has been improving, I think the baseline still remains that there are still cases where there are really poor decisions that happen. And when DRS was initially introduced, I think at that point it was known as UDRS, and that was around this 2008 timeframe. It was meant to focus on those blunders, really bad calls, really obviously either not out or out scenarios, and making sure that teams are not robbed of that opportunity. Now, with any technology, it's not 100%, it's not perfect, and that's where umpire's calls comes in. What we've learned over time, even as these ball tracking technologies have started to improve, is that while they're very, very good in terms of estimating the line, they're slightly not as accurate when it comes to estimating the height. And that's where, when they're trying to figure out whether a ball is in the hitting zone, basically seeing if the ball goes on to hit the wickets, there is a certain degree of doubt in some cases, especially pertaining to height. And that's really where umpire's calls comes in. And I think, in my opinion, there's a lot of outrage over this. There's a lot of even ex-players and commentators talking about this. And the reason for this is they just don't understand the details of the technology. So I know we're going to get into the details a little bit, but I think that really should be the baseline understanding that it's meant to take care of absolute blunders, any obvious calls, and it's definitely having its impact in evolving the game overall.
So, Himanish, can you talk to us about the science behind DRS, the umpire's call?
So by DRS, I assume you mean Hawkeye, right? Because the DRS consists of multiple technologies. You have Snicko, you have Hotspot, you have Hawkeye. So our contention is with Hawkeye right now. That's the main debate going around. Now, Hawkeye is quite simple. It has a set of 6 cameras, which are, they have designated locations on the ground. And its objective is to reconstruct the ball path. So with your cameras, you click pictures of the ball, which are shown as a video to you, but they're actually pictures, discrete pictures. And using that information, you plot a track of the ball. That's what Hawkeye does. Now, your prediction technology, which is predicting the path after impact, is what you reconstruct from that path. So given the data between pitching and impact, can you use a projectile motion model to extrapolate the path of the ball and therefore decide whether it will hit the stumps or not? So that's the science behind it. So you capture frames. That's why when you look at cameras, you have a frames per second measure, which tells you how many pictures is the camera taking per second. So Hawkeye uses a 300 FPS camera, or like a set of cameras. And so they capture 300 frames per second. And that will be used to plot and reconstruct the path of the ball and then extrapolate from there where the ball would have gone. So that's what Hawkeye does. It's fairly simple in its, schematics that this happened.
Yeah. So one thing I think is worth mentioning is, I know in general people will talk about Hawkeye and Snicko, but really from an ICC perspective, it's ball tracking, because there's multiple companies who do that. So there's Virtual Eye and Hawkeye. Right. And similarly, there's sound-based edge detection, which is Snickometer, and I believe Ultra Edge is the other one.
Ultra Edge is the other one.
So these are, So there's these multiple companies, and then the third piece is the heat-based tracking, which is Hotspot. That's the only vendor out there. I know. I think we often talk about it as in terms of Hawkeye's issues, but it's really ball tracking's issues, because while with these companies have slightly different algorithms, the complexity and the issues that they both have are very, very similar.
And I keep hearing about the 50% rule in LBW decision. Himanish, can you shed some light on that?
Yeah, this is going to be a little long, but I'll tell you what exactly happened. So because you don't have infinite pictures of the ball, right? You have a finite set of pictures. You have, let's say, 400 pictures of the ball. So you've got to use those 400 pictures to extrapolate where the ball is going, right? So there's an inherent error in this process, because you can't exactly pinpoint where the ball is at all points in time. So you have to predict it. So what you see on TV is the most probable path of the ball. But what Hawkeye gives you is a distribution of outcomes with a certain error. So there's a dispersion in those outcomes. What you see on TV is the most probable path, but there is actually an error in the outcome. And so this error depends on a bunch of things, right? So depending on where the ball pitched and where it hit you, how fast was the ball, because all these things affect the number of data points you have for Hawkeye. A fast ball will enable you to gather fewer frames than a slower ball, right? So depending on where the ball is, how fast it is, and so on, you'll have different errors in the computation of your predicted path. Now, the mistake we make and the mistake Shane Warne and Tendulkar make when they talk about it is they watch it on TV, and on TV it's designed to give you an easy experience. So what they show you on TV is one path, and the commentators present it like it's the only path that could have happened had the batsman not been there. That's not true, and that's why they make this mistake of saying, how can it be out and not out on the same ball if the umpire says so? Because it's not the same ball. Now, there's an inherent error in the prediction because it's a conjecture, right? It's not a true thing. It's a conjecture on the basis of the data you have, and the data can vary. So that conjecture has a dispersion, it has an error. And to account for that error, to give it a margin for error, the ICC have decided that 50% is the margin that they should keep. Now, this was decided after a bunch of tests with a group at MIT in England. So they collaborated with the ICC and they ran a bunch of tests. Now, I personally don't think those tests are very conclusive because they bowled only 150 to 200 balls each using the red, white, and pink ball. And they had one spinner and one pacer. So what they did was they built a frame on the pitch and they shot a video of the balls and they cut off the feed at a given point in time. So that's meant to simulate the impact. And then they compared the prediction of the path to the actual path. And on the basis of those tests, they've decided that 50% is a good enough margin for all cases. Because you see, you can't compute the error for all cases live in a match. So they haven't made the results public. But on the basis of those tests, which I don't think are significant enough, they've decided that 50% is a good enough margin to have a general rule. Now, this is also concerned with how viewers interpret the broadcast. So having a more technical rule where you have different errors, where you have things like uncertainty cones on the broadcast will confuse viewers, according to the ICC. So Cricketing View contacted Paul Hawkins, who's the founder of Hawkeye, and he said that we wanted to represent the dispersion in the outcomes using a cone on the broadcast. So instead of one path, you have a cone of paths. So that shows you that there's a probability of the ball being somewhere else as well. It's not just one path. But the ICC vetoed that because they don't think that the viewers will be able to comprehend or understand that. And this is what contributes to the problems you see with the DRS in the public eye, that people think it's one trajectory, one ball, it's the only truth. And how can it be out or not out depending on the umpire? Now, the way cricket works is the philosophy of the game is that the umpire has primacy. You've put that chap there to make a decision. So that guy's made a decision, and the review system is a decision-making aid. It's not a decision maker.
Right.
So given that the umpire has made the decision, does the technology have enough evidence to overturn it? Now, in the 50% zone, right, it concludes, according to the protocol set by the game, the ICC, that you don't have enough evidence. And as a broad rule, you can't overturn the decision. Now, you can probably go a step ahead and say that maybe don't have the umpire at all. Maybe just have the DRS. Now, that's a change in philosophy. Then, the governors of the game have to decide that you change your philosophy. The umpire has no importance, and you just refer all LBWs to the DRS, like you refer all runouts to the third umpire. But that will entail a change in philosophy. The current philosophy is that you have primacy given to the umpire, and the umpire decides, and then the DRS sort of augments that decision. And if it doesn't have enough evidence to change it, then you don't change it. So that's what it is. So the problem lies in how you see it on TV, right? And that makes you believe that it's one path, but it's not. It's dependent on the frame rate. It's dependent on the contact you make with the ball, when you make the contact, how fast the ball goes, and there's a lot of factors. And there hasn't been good testing of this thing in match conditions because the ICC, I guess, they're just too lax about it. So they haven't tested these things in match conditions. So in the absence of those tests, the only tests we have are the Winchester tests, which were done, I think, 5 years ago. And on the basis of that, they concluded that 50% is a good thing. They haven't published any results about that. We don't know what the dispersion of errors is for Hawkeye. We know it's not Gaussian. Paul Hawkins has responded to a couple of papers by a couple of researchers at Cardiff saying that it's not a normally distributed thing with the errors. So we just know that, and we don't know anything else. So in the absence of all that, they've decided the committee has decided, whatever you call it, the working committee has decided that 50% is a good enough, bracket for the error. And in that case, you just maintain the primacy of the umpire and just go with what the umpire says. And that's what umpire's call is.
And I think that's a really key point that a lot of people fail to understand. The philosophy that Himanish alluded to is very important. And the reason for that is it's supposed to be a review of the decision and not a review of the appeal. Because a lot of people will say, well, when we have technology, why don't we just move the umpire out of the question? It doesn't matter what he gave on the field. Let's just follow what the technology is telling us. But it's not. The philosophy right now is we follow the umpire unless absolutely needed. And that's where it's a decision review system, meaning review of the decision, not a review of the initial appeal itself.
So is that more, it sounds to me more like cricket is caught between this, where they want to keep some traditional aspects of the game, but also embrace technology to a certain extent. Does that sound like a fair statement, where they're trying to kind of tread that fine line between because they're not essentially overturning the umpire's decision based on an assumption that technology is showing this is the outcome of it. They want to say, well, this is what the on-field umpire decided. Let's go with his call, despite what technology is showing is the most likely scenario.
I personally think it's definitely a bit of that, but I mean, more than that, if you think about the way they've solved this problem or they've handled this problem at the current moment, it is logical if you think about it, because there's a technology that will tell you or that will predict with a certain percentage of confidence. When that confidence is low, then you're relying on the expert who's standing in the field. So that is not necessarily illogical. When you think about it, that's very much logical. So even while it is true that in a way they're saying, yeah, let's try to keep the game as it was and then add an element of technology to maybe improve it. If you think about it, it's completely logical. I don't really know if there's a different method to take this approach. Some might say, oh yeah, let's completely, kick the umpire out and put him in the box and he can just review no balls and run outs. But that's actually a game changer. That's a completely different conversation.
Yeah, it just makes it a different sport in some ways.
It's basically an admission of the fact that your technology isn't perfect, and the umpire came before the technology, so you have him. Right now, you can change that, and you can maybe say that you can have a separate umpire for DRS decisions in the TV box, and he has all the power to decide whether an LBW is out or not. And you take it out of the player's hands completely. Now, that's a decision for, again, the game to make, right? In fact, the head of Virtual Eye suggested this recently. It was an interview about 2 weeks ago where he said that, one solution to this umpire's call problem is just take it out of the player's hands and have a specially trained DRS umpire who knows what's going on, and on the basis of what he sees or she sees, they can decide for the players. Now, you can do that, and that's a decision the game might make, but at the current time, it's very logical. It's meant to be consistent. It can't be perfect always. It's just meant to be logically consistent. And the logical consistency is that if you don't have enough evidence on the basis of the ball tracker, then the best way to go is go back to the umpire, because that's what it is, right? So you don't add any new information to the umpire's decision if the ball tracker isn't conclusive enough. So then you go back to the umpire and you go back to that decision. Now, as I said, the problem lies in how you represent it. Now, you can change that. You can represent the distribution of outcomes at the stumps. And then you can also calculate, and I've done these calculations, of what are the chances of the ball hitting the stumps, given that distribution of outcomes. And maybe commentators would like to represent that when they talk about it, because then you can certainly say that although this ball looks like it's hitting the stumps, it had only a 40% chance of it, because there's a distribution of outcomes, and you've got to average over all those outcomes to see the chances of the ball hitting the stumps. And the problem is that the commentators don't talk about that, and they don't know that. Like Shane Warne is someone who doesn't know this, and he keeps talking about it. So a better way would be to represent the percentage chances of the ball hitting the stumps, but you need the ICC to change its archaic stance for that. Yeah, and that would lead to a lot of confusion going away. Yeah.
So it seems pretty obvious to me that the umpire's call is very crucial in resolving tight calls. My understanding is that it addresses the simple concept there needs to be a clear mistake by the on-field umpire to reverse the decision.
Right.
So
Yeah.
why? I mean, you guys touched on it a little bit. Why the umpire's call is so controversial, and almost every time someone is frustrated, like a section of fans, they get frustrated when it impacts the final decision. I think it speaks to an understanding of the technology and understanding of what it is meant to do. And I think it gets reinforced when the commentators say, oh, I don't agree with this. I don't agree with what Hawkeye showed, or I don't agree with the projection. I think it kind of feeds into that
Right.
because most fans, like, we don't do deep dives into like how DRS works and like understanding the technology and understanding the different, like the 50% rule, or all of those concepts. We go based on what we see and what we think should show up, and then it's reinforced by what the commentators say. So do you think that is contributes to why it's perceived with so much doubt?
No, I was just saying that the example that comes to mind when you say that, Benny, is actually from just yesterday's play, where or maybe it was the day before, but basically India was bowling to England, and one of the LBW appeals showed that it was going much higher than it wasn't even umpire's call. And Sunil Gavaskar in the commentary box, and I saw many others on Twitter say there's no way that was going high. This pitch is not bouncing that much, and that was at best umpire's call. And that's just a perception that people have. That's their, I don't even want to call it an estimate because it's just their guess, really. So a lot of those aspects add up as well. So there's obviously all the confusion around how umpire's call works and why is it out and not out when we see the ball hitting. But there's also this perspective where people will generally say, the pitch isn't bouncing that much, when clearly there's been a lot of balls which have gone over Rishabh Pant's gloves or Butler's gloves, and those balls are there, even if they are the outlier, even if they are not, the 80% case. Those balls are happening, but it's just people's perception that, oh, that doesn't sound likely at all. I think they're just making their stuff up. So that adds to the confusion for sure.
Yeah, I think it's because the commentators aren't educated about how the technology works, actually. And there's this commentary culture nowadays where if you're an ex-player, you're good enough to commentate, which is not true because most commentators are very incompetent. And this is another dimension of their incompetence, that they don't understand how DRS works, and they think their naked eye can maybe overrule that, or like say something better about the ball's trajectory. But this 100% contributes to the misunderstanding, because you might have a doubt about the DRS, right? But when you see Shane Warne or Tendulkar, when he's not defending India, when you see him tweeting about it, then you definitely get it. Like you get this feedback from these guys that yes, we are right about this. And that contributes to this whole cycle of misinformation, which I think it's the commentator's job to educate themselves because they're paid for it. They have a job to educate the masses about the game that they commentate on. It's literally that. So they don't do that well, and therefore it contributes to the whole, quagmire of misinformation.
And Nish, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, I just wanted to echo both Mayank and Himanish's sentiment in that there are like multiple facets into why there's this continued outrage, right? Like we need to understand that people need to, it's a hard concept, right? The casual fan, unless we deliver it in such a way that the casual fan understands, it's hard to expect them to understand. And this is the ownership of ICC, the commentators, etc., to simplify a process, right? One of the ways to get people engaged is to simplify something complex into digestible, understandable components. And if you don't do that, and if there's a big science to this, and you're kind of force feed this into an audience which is in the heat of the moment, coming with inherent biases and stuff, right?
Yeah.
And then you're just adding fuel to the fire. And then on top of this, casual fans like myself, until I read the articles that's written, across the cricketing literature about DRS and its implications, right? I wouldn't know what the science behind it. Even now, my understanding has improved certainly, but is it 200%? Nowhere close. So imagine a person like Sachin or like Sangakkara or Shane Warne with such a large influence of the cricketing masses say something like a casual fan like myself would say, right? So then you have the problem of this whole outrage cycle, and then you automatically, people are attacking DRS and Hawkeye and so forth, So why would they? Let's just think this through, right? Why would you attack something and call it a failure? There's an inherent understanding that, okay, if something needs changing, it means there's something wrong with it. We don't know if there's something wrong with DRS, right? It's a toolkit for the umpire to help resolve certain issues, right? It's an accessory. Now it's not a full front solution, right? It's something that the umpires can use it if needed to come to a logical conclusion. And long point short is it is a complex device that needs to be simplified for the larger audience to understand. And one more thing is technology is here to stay, and it'll have a bigger impact in all of sports, right? Just like in any facet of life, right? 20 years ago, this cell phone that I hold in my hand was, could be considered magic. Today, it's common practice. Technology will seep into all facets of life. And similar parallel can be drawn with VAR in soccer, right? There is an incredible outrage after every game with how, the commentators, the people behind the scenes who are adjudicating these things for VAR, VAR for our audience is video assistance referee, which is the technology equivalent of DRS in soccer. And there's a lack of understanding of how VAR is used. And again, its implementation is in early stages. So there's a lot of complexity. So cricket is, kind of like much more mature, but the paths are very similar in that the audience need to be kept and simplified at all times to understand the game better.
And I was going to throw up this question of what the legitimate failings of DRS are, and in the way they're implemented right now, and can it be improved at all? And I think I already got my answer. I think the answer lies in education. Educating fans, and whose job is it? Is it the ICC or is it the commentators? Because nobody's making that effort, and I don't think it high up on the priority list for ICC. I feel like they would say it's not our job to educate you. Our job is to provide you the technology, and you guys figure it out. And I think the commentators, since they're essentially relaying the game to us as we watch it, I think that's very important for them to have an understanding of it and explain it, rather than just have a perspective of a casual fan, because then anyone can go and commentate on the game. And I think just thinking about it, maybe this is a sidebar, but commentators, they have a lot more responsibility than they think. It's not just a cushy job for an ex-player.
Yeah.
Not just this, but you're supposed to read up on the players that are playing the game. You're supposed to read up on the tactics and the strategies that are being employed by each team. And I think, and the same with technology, it's such a big component of our sport right now that if we are not understanding, and every time we as fans get frustrated with the technology, I think it's the commentator's job to explain it. So I think the answer is in educating the fans and educating the general public, and probably even the players as far as understanding DRS. Mayank, do you think this can actually be improved at all? Are there alternate solutions?
Oh, absolutely. I think the solution in general, like from the technology perspective, is going to improve, because as I said, the hitting zone that they define at the beginning of the call, I mentioned that they're pretty good at predicting the line as compared to the height. But a while back, Simon Toffel confirmed during the India-Australia series that a while back, even that hitting zone was from the center of the off stump to the center of the leg stump. So from a technology perspective, they've changed that from the center to the side, meaning they've been able to get very accurate and say that, yeah, we're able to figure out the line very well. Height, we're still working on something. So from a technology perspective, it's going to improve. I do think there's an aspect of communication, which Nish pointed out to, which him and Nish mentioned, that, just from showing either like a percentage of confidence in that call or something like that. I know they don't want to show a cone of possible projections, but at least some sort of confidence percentage or something like that would go a long way in making sure that the end user is comfortable, and also pushing like broadcasters and communicators to commentators to just be read up on that, just do some sort of homework. But I do have one other point related to DRS, which is actually not related to Umpire's call at all, which I personally think is something to be looked at and something to be changed. And that, in my mind, is hotspot, because in ICC's official documents, they say the minimum requirements for DRS require sound-based technology, meaning SNCC or Ultra Edge, ball tracking, meaning Hawkeye or Virtual Eye. They do not actually require the heat-based mapping, which is what hotspot is. And in addition to that, from whatever I've read, whatever I've tried to understand, it's clear that hotspot has a dependence on which direction the light is coming from. So if the sun is on the offside and you're looking at a leg side edge, it's not sometimes not as 100% sure. And they in fact have rules which say that listen to SNCO over hotspot. So if we are doing that, if we are going to ignore hotspot anyways, why have it at all? In my mind, that is another issue that the ICC could look at. It's not as big an issue as the Umpire's call, but even that, in my mind, undermines the confidence that people have, because they'll see two technologies back to back. They'll see SNCO, which will say one thing, hotspot, which will say another thing. And I know I don't have the numbers around it, but anecdotally, I've seen that sort of variation quite a few times. So that's another thing that I would think about.
Yeah, so there's two things. So one, I think the ICC need to take ownership of this thing, and they need to commission a broad-based test of how ball tracking performs in various conditions. They haven't done that yet. They should do it. Secondly, there should be a change in the broadcast. So the broadcast shows you that one path, and that's what contributes to your misconception of what's happening. So the broadcast should display some sort of a percentage chance of hitting the stumps. I think that will communicate better to people that it's a probability. It's not a sure event. It's a distribution of outcomes, and that's what people don't understand right now. And the ICC are afraid that people won't understand that, but we have things like DLS, and we don't need to patronize cricket fans by saying that they're dumb enough to not understand what a percentage chance of hitting the stumps means, right, when we have so many complex numbers in cricket. So it's okay, I think, and the ICC should push for this change so that this controversy dies down and people understand that the ICC are logical and consistent about how they use umpire's call. Right.
I miss the days of arguing over the Duckworth-Lewis system. Good old days.
I mean, that's also another topic we can broach in some other episode.
Yes.
But yeah.
One day.
Because people don't understand it, people, debate about it.
I mean, talking about education, right? Like we've been talking about ICC and commentators, it's their responsibility. They should kind of communicate this better. I think amateur bloggers have been doing a lot better job in recent times of explaining or trying to break it down and explain it to us.
Yeah, and again, this is a whole different topic regarding how commentators are, former cricketers become commentators and then they regurgitate the same, spiel of, tired, learned commentaries, right? So one thing that came to mind was recently, I think at Indian Mourinho, Alagappan called out Murali Karthik for his lack of research, and then Murali Karthik took to Twitter to respond. So again, this shows that our commentators are, not up to the mark or not up to the standards that we as audience set for them. It's funny and disappointing.
If there are any cricket commentators listening to our podcast, we like you guys. Please come on our show. We can have a
they can add us. It's fine.
We'll have a healthy discussion. Let's have let's talk things out. Let's have a healthy debate. I mean, that's what we're here for. We don't want to just accept what conventional wisdom is about all these things. We want to take deep dives, and if there's any shortcoming, we as cricket fans, we want to see that addressed. So, that's my sincere thing. But Himanish, you recently opened the floodgates to quite a few blogs analyzing DRS when you published a set of data that contained over 3,000 referrals from test matches that spanned the period between November 2010 and December 2020. So let me ask you, what are the trends that stood out for you, and does it give any indication of how umpiring standards have evolved over this time period?
Yeah, so I released the data in December, and Tony Cork, who goes by Matter of Stats on Twitter, he was kind enough and skillful enough to make a blog post on it and analyze the data. And there are a few conclusions on the basis of what he's done, which is that your referrals are successful about 25% of the time. And that hasn't really changed that much over the years. So the umpire's call data was recorded only since 2017. And the umpire's call is about, let's see, it's about 10 to 15% of your total number of decisions, but your reviews are successful about 25% of the time. And that doesn't change. Now, he also did this by team. And by team as well, there's not a significant difference. You have about 25% successful reviews by team. That doesn't change much. India have a higher percentage of umpires call decisions, but that might just be because they started using the DRS late, and that's when you have umpires call decisions being recorded. So that's just a factor of that. Now let's look at how he did it by batting and bowling. So yeah, so if you're batting, then you have a higher success rate of your reviews, and that's logical because if you're batting, you know if you've edged it and so on. So bowling wise, the review success rate is about 20%, 15%. Batting wise, it's higher than 25%. So the average is 25, but batting has a higher success rate, and that's logical. What else did he do? So he did an analysis by umpire, and Michael Goff has the highest percentage of unsuccessful reviews against him. So he's the best by that metric. So Michael Goff, Billy Bowden, Dharam Sena, Kettlebro, who's called Kettlebot on Reddit because he's a robot who makes all the right decisions. So yeah, these are the best performing umpires. Joel Wilson and Billy Doctorow are the worst performing. They have a success rate of slightly more than 50%. So only about 50 to 55% of their decisions are upheld.
Do we not have any
The
Indian
other-
umpires on that list?
Let's see. So they have S. Ravi, and he's fairly in the middle. Like so about 25% of his decisions are overturned. So that's fairly average. The other interesting thing we saw was that if you look at the referrals by the day of the test, then the success percentage goes down as you go further in the match. Now that might be because you're taking desperate reviews and you want to get people out and so on. It's not a big trend. It's not a very big trend, but there is a trend that the number of successful reviews or the percentage of successful reviews goes down as the match progresses. That's pretty much it. He had a couple of ground analyses as well. He had a couple of player analyses as well, which I can post in the podcast notes. The important thing which I want to bring to light is that Kohli had a success rate of 40% while batting, and only about 15% while bowling.
The one point I was going to mention was when you think about that data, I know we talked about details from an umpire standpoint, but overall 25% success in overturning a call means that the umpire gets it right 75% of the time a decision is reviewed. That's just when a decision is reviewed. There's so many other cases when they're not even reviewed, meaning that these umpires who are making these decisions within seconds, who are basically making snap calls for a living, they are doing it very, very well. I mean, obviously there's some variation in umpires by ground as well, by players as well, but that's expected. So overall, I think that tells you that umpires in general who are doing that job at the international level are doing a pretty solid job.
Yeah, I mean, anecdotally, whenever an umpire's decision, like especially when it comes to LBWs, when they are challenged, like I just get this feeling that it's going to be umpire's call. So why even bother? Do you think that kind of puts an element of doubt in the fielding team if they want to, appeal it? Because for most of the time when an umpire has made a decision and they send it upstairs, there's a very high likelihood. Again, this is anecdotal. There seems to be a very high likelihood that it's going to stay on field with the on-field umpire's decision. Do you think that's impacting how fielding teams, or even like batsmen for that matter, appeal the decision?
If that rule started in 2017, I believe. So I don't know, Himanish, if you have data specific. Well, I guess all your data is after 2017, right? So we may not be able to see a clear trend, but my thought would be since 2017, when they started, not deducting a review when it was umpire's call, teams would be a little more liberal to take it because they don't really have anything to lose. At least that would be my guesstimate.
Yeah, so there's no data on when they took it and when they didn't. I just know that since 2017, the umpire's call percentage has gone up.
Okay.
So yeah, it might mean that teams are referring more. I also misspoke on Kohli a little bit. So Kohli, I misinterpreted the graph here. I just want to say that he has a success rate of 2 over 15. So that's about 14% while batting. So that's low. So
Okay.
out of the 15 recorded reviews that he's taken while batting, 2 have been successful, 9 have been unsuccessful, and 4 have been umpire's call. So he does have a low success rate while batting.
I think it just draws attention to the fact you cannot be emotional when you send these decisions up for review, because it doesn't matter what you think it is. You have to be a little bit more, you have to have a lot more common sense. And especially as a batsman, you need to really trust your partner to help make you that decision.
Benny, what you're saying is don't trust Siraj or Broad, right?
Well,
they'll skew your numbers.
I have more sympathy for newer players. I don't have much grace for the more senior players. I remember the good old days when Virender Sehwag will just automatically review, like without even consulting his partner.
Yeah, especially I remember Sehwag's review of Malinga's LBW in the 2011 final. That was as plumb an LBW as you can imagine.
Yeah.
So
and I think he did it twice in that World Cup.
Yeah,
against Pakistan also he did it in the semi-final. And it was a similar kind of ball which sort of hit him on the pad in front and kept a little low and skidded on, and then he just reviewed. I think it was Junaid Khan who bowled it, and he was very hopeful. It also has to do with the ego of the batsman, right?
That's
right.
True.
You know,
it's just that attitude.
I want to review anyway.
Yeah, just that attitude. Like, there's no way he got me out. No, it can't be true. Which, actually, I don't know. It's probably also a mindset of a champion batsman. So I don't know. I'll give him some grace for that.
I think one thing that general fans need to keep in mind when they talk about DRS is whether the system is 100% or not, which clearly it's not. It still allows for consistency. And what I mean by consistency is there will be some biases that umpires have. And I don't mean by country. I'm not saying, S. Ravi is going to give decisions for India or something like that. That's not been proven by data. But the other bias, what I mean by that is if they've always grown up on pitches which don't bounce that much, they might be more willing to give a LBW when it hits the knee roll, while somebody in Australia may usually give that not out. And that's where DRS brings that consistency, and we need to keep that in mind when judging the system so critically.
All right. Well, we are going to leave it there. So as you have heard, DRS is a complex system, as most technologies are. There are always going to be pros and cons, but our consensus is that it offers more benefits than not. We're going to put up a bunch of data and links in our show notes and on our website. So do check it out and let us know your thoughts and feels. One thing is for sure, this won't be the last discussion about DRS we ever have. Here at The Last Wicket, we are always thinking of ways that we can cover the hottest topics in the cricket world. And this can sometimes cause us to miss out on cricket news that might be worth mentioning. So in the first edition of our Meanwhile segment, our team will share our thoughts on news that almost passed us by. So Nish, what do you have for us this week?
So for this week, hot off the press is the first one that I want to focus on is Australian tour cancellation, or I should say postponement. Now this comes on the back of England recently pulling out of their ODI leg, and this is something that's kind of expected given the hesitation around Australia tour. Despite South Africa's best efforts, it looks like this tour has been postponed indefinitely. And now the problem with this for Australia is that this impacts their World Test Championship final prospects. So as we know now that New Zealand have booked their place in the finals, and for Australia to go through, they need other results to go their way. Essentially, they need England to win by a margin of either 1-0 or 2-0 or 1-2 in the ongoing series against India, or if India win the series 1-0, or if the series ends in a draw. So that will essentially put Australia against New Zealand in the finals this summer. Okay. For England, destiny is still in their own hands. If they win the series by 4-0, 3-0, or 3-1, which looked unlikely 3 days ago, they can potentially reach the finals. India is still in a strong position where if they win by 2-0, 2-1, 3-0, 3-1, or 4-0, they can go to the finals as well. So India is the most likely team to the finals. Mayank, thoughts?
So one of the interesting pieces that somebody mentioned on Twitter to me was since the COVID situation started, there's only been 2 tours that Australia have not canceled. one was England, and then having India at home. So there's that other angle that a lot of people are talking about. Oh yeah, the big three of cricket. They don't really care about the revenue of others. I obviously, sitting here, it's hard for me to speculate that. But I mean, I'm sure that if this was a tour of India, the chances of pulling out were probably going to be slightly lesser than South Africa. And the other point there is, this is a really tough situation in general. Like COVID is very, very tough, and these things can happen. You know, people testing positive can happen in whether they're touring India, whether they're touring England or Australia. It's unfortunate that it happened with South Africa, considering where the board is and how they're sort of still recovering. But it's kind of what we'll sort of have to deal with over the next year or so.
I mean, I want to give the benefit of the doubt to the Australians because they essentially sacrificed their spot in the final, right? If they cannot reschedule this tour in time, they're going to miss out on qualifying for the Test Championship final. And again, like Mike, you said, the COVID thing, it is a serious thing, right? Like, we are talking about it from a purely sports point of view, but I mean, there have been so many deaths. People have, got sick. People have lost jobs. It's affected our lives, like each and every one of our lives, in a very strong way. So it's obviously something that Cricket Australia want to be very careful about as far as, how their players would get affected. So I want to give them the benefit of the doubt. But like you also said, it doesn't help that the two tours that they did not cancel were, cash cows. But I want to give the Australian team the benefit of the doubt. I'm really sad because I was looking forward to that series. After all, it was going to be Australia's first. It was Australia going back to South Africa for a Test series for the first time since that sandpaper incident, and I thought it made for a good narrative. It would have been fascinating cricket, and we are going to miss out on that. I really hope that they can reschedule that tour. I really want to see that happen. I don't know if they even considered an alternate option, like having it in Australia or having it at a neutral ground. Maybe it was a logistics thing, but it'll be a travesty for cricket fans if we don't get to see these two teams take on.
I think Australia offered to host them and they
Yeah.
refused.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Australia, South Africa is always very competitive, right? Because they have similar conditions and they always beat each other in each other's home. So it's always competitive. So it would be nice to see. It's a shame.
Graham Smith was pretty disappointed despite South Africa's best efforts. I think if from the reports that I read for the research for this topic, I think South Africa were willing to import multiple set some guidelines in terms of importing an Australian system for tracking of where the players are and the virus rates are, and they also planned on doing extensive biosecure bubbles. So they were willing to go above and beyond to incorporate Australia. But at the end of the day, this is, you cannot really blame anyone. It's not a blame game. We live in weird times right now. So we just have to be as agile as possible and, take things as it comes. It's a fair call. And one more point regarding the World Test Championship is, had Australia not lost those points for their poor over rate in Melbourne, they would have been on par with New Zealand in terms of PCT percentage, and then it would have come down to runs per wicket ratio, where Australia are currently better than New Zealand, and they would have had their own destiny in their hands. So this kind of goes to show that how important over rates are. It's just not like a numbers or monetary fine. There's much bigger impact as we go into the future.
I'm guessing Kane Williamson is so happy that he doesn't have to worry about these fine margins for once.
Yeah.
It's all a bit farcical, right? Like, some teams have played only home series, some teams have played 3 series, some have played 5 series. It's very farcically put together, and it was a farce from the beginning, but with COVID, it's become even much more of a farce. Yeah.
Right. I mean, it's definitely the whole concept of the World Test Championship. I think it's a topic that we, as a podcast, should talk about sometime soon. Because I have a lot of grouses against the way it has been structured at the moment.
Well, I will say one thing though, I do agree that, it's not been perfectly structured, but this is the first time somebody's scared about Sri Lanka beating some random team because, that affects their team's position. So in that way, it definitely brings the cricket community together and makes them focus on games other than their own nation. So I do think there's positive to it. the first iteration is far from perfect. That I think we all agree.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay, now moving on to the next news roundup event is one of a freak injury. Zach Crawley, England's incumbent number 3, slipped and fell outside of the dressing room in Chennai on a marble floor and got his wrist jarred, which led him to miss the first and second test matches. Now that's as bizarre as they come. Now let's go back in time here a little bit, and we can look at a few other incidents quickly that are similar in terms of freakishness. One, of course, is the famous McGrath 2005 Edgbaston, or the day before, or the day after Edgbaston, I believe it was.
Yeah, it was the morning.
Stepped on a stray ball and slipped and fell while playing touch rugby, and and everybody know how that Edgbaston test turned out. So it's a case of what could have been. So that's one incident. Another one in 2006 is Yuvraj playing Coco and he got injured, which was kind of important because we were in the middle of the Champions Trophy at that time and we had a crunch game against Australia, which he missed. And my research tells me that Venkateswar Rao, the selector at the time, was very, very unhappy with the events that followed.
Did they ban Coco
And another...
after that?
So I was actually going to mention that. I feel like there was another injury, maybe not as severe, but it was Coco related. And I heard like Twitter fans and Indian fans just outraged saying, why are we playing Coco and all
Seriously,
of that?
let's play soccer instead and get injured in a different way.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I want to understand why we is it something that's habitual or is there something actual reason behind it? Obviously, we're not going to play a game of cricket to warm up for cricket, I guess. I don't know. I
mean, cricket is not really made for
a
a warm-up game.
Yeah. I think it's a warm-up and like team bonding or something like that.
I mean, soccer is just one ball, right?
From
it's just easier to kind of organize, like a bunch of guys just split into two teams and play. All you need is a ball and like makeshift goalpost, and that's it. Cricket, you need a bat, ball, like pick players for each team.
And the last injury that I have on my list here is Hayden being attacked by a dog in 2006 when he went for a run, and this cost him a deep cut on his ankle, and he was almost on the verge of missing the first Ashes test. But however, he ended up playing, and then England was 5-0.
This
is the kind of sabotage we need, like.
Well, they should. I mean, if India want to try out these tactics, they should. I think they should have these games near Chennai, like what they're doing right now, because trust me, dogs in Chennai are really vicious, as vicious as probably the dog that bit Hayden. I was actually going to ask, was that actually Chennai? Because yeah, we have some crazy dogs in Chennai.
Yeah, slight anecdote there. Like during my visa process at the Chennai consulate, there's typically a long line there to get to the US consulate in Chennai, and there are a bunch of like crazy dogs roaming around that area. This was around at least 10 years ago. So yes, your point stands about Chennai dogs. Anyway, moving on to the third roundup of news that I have is, of course, is less than 24 hours old, and this is really hot off the press, is Kyle Myers. Like Kyle Myers, maybe a week ago, outside of the people in the not have known much about him. In fact, I did not know much about him as well. And he scored an unbeaten 210 not out, that is unbeaten, sorry, to finish off a stupendous 395 run chase against Bangladesh last night. Now, this was remarkable for a lot of reasons, not only because of, a typical reasons of chasing a target, chasing a target in subcontinent, chasing a target of over 350, all that stuff is true. But Myers is a person making his debut, and he did not, for one instance, look like a person making his debut. Fourth innings chases are not stuff for people who are making debuts to perform well at. You have people like Sachin Tendulkar and other established players who have succeeded in this role after years of, being in the game and understanding the nuances of how to, pace a chase. And so this was extraordinary considering his debut, and then West Indies were playing like practically a C or a B team. So yeah, I thought this was like, fourth inning chases are oddly becoming more and more frequent. What once seemed like Mount Everest, people are surmounting these. I don't know if this is a trend, but it's certainly seeming to, we just need 4 data points for a trend, right? So it looks like we're heading there. So.
Well, first of all, I at 5 a.m, I'm like waking up to see if India has bowled out or batting the second innings yet. With that attitude, I was checking the score. But then social media was all about the Kyle Mayers guy, and I was like, half asleep. I'm like, who? What? Why are we talking about a West Indies batsman? But then I was looking at the score. I was like, this is very impressive, and I was just stunned because his batting average was like 28, and here he is in his first game, like at the international like test level, fourth innings, and against Bangladesh spinners in their backyard, he's taking them to victory. He's taking West Indies to victory, and there was a lot of obviously a lot of tweets and a lot of posts, and people are praising the innings, and I think it's all well deserved. I'm still partial to Kushal Pereira's unbeaten ton in that 1 wicket victory over South Africa. I still think that for me that remains as at least in my opinion was the best chase, along with Stokes and Rishabh Pant. But yeah, I think it's very interesting. Like Nish, you said that it seems like in just this year we are seeing some really good chases. I think players are getting really good at not letting the perception, oh, it's hard to chase a stiff target on the last day. I think that was just the general perception for a long time. But players, the mindset has changed that they don't think of it that way. Nobody is afraid of spin on the fifth day pitch or the wear and tear, all of those things. They just go with the mindset of we can chase this down and we can win. And they play with common sense. So I'm not really surprised on one hand that this is becoming more of a trend. And it actually makes for some good cricket. So yeah, that's exciting.
So I think the one piece I will add is Shakib Al Hasan was out injured. So that definitely played against Bangladesh. He was in the 11 but could not bowl in the fourth inning. So that obviously doesn't take anything against what Mayers and Bonner, the two debutants, managed. It's still a pretty solid accomplishment for sure. But what I tried to do, because, like you guys said, both of them were unknown quantities before yesterday. I was just trying to read more about these guys from people who are from the region. So the Caribbean Cricket Podcast, as an example, they talked about a couple of their bloggers who have been very adamant about Mayers in particular and how he should be part of the team. So like Benny did, I also checked their first class record and I was like, that doesn't seem like that great a record, but maybe there's more to it. Maybe he's playing on pitches which are not as conducive. And there were definitely some advocates who've been talking about this for a year or so, apparently.
Manish?
Yeah, so I just wanted to add that Anant Narayanan, who's a statistician who's worked for a long time with a lot of different organizations, he writes for Cricket for Now, and he maintains this Golden Willow ranking, which is basically a ranking of the best test innings. And he factors in a lot of things like the pitch quality, the bowling quality, and there's a lot of stuff happening there. So he pushed an update today which said that this innings by Kyle Mayers was the 8th best innings of all time. For the record, Kushal Pereira's innings is number 1.
Yeah.
And the Ben Stokes innings at Headingley is number 19 or 18.
Okay.
But yeah, so this innings was number 8. And he was trying to also tweak his algorithm to account for the fact that it's a debut. So he hasn't yet done that. But if he does that, he believes it'll be in the top 5 somewhere. But if you haven't checked out his work, you definitely should. Like, he's the OG of cricket stats work. So he pushed an update saying that it's number 8 on the list. Yeah.
Also, Mayers has a batting style very similar to Ridley Jacobs. I don't know if anyone else, thought about that when seeing.
I remember.
It was just a very muscular hitting. Like, he moved well, like in the crease. It was not a perfect innings. There was a lot of streaky shots, edges, and all of that. But for most part, he was moving well within the crease and playing the spinners pretty well. But yeah, I thought he was brilliant and he deserves all the credit and attention. Apparently, Cricket West Indies arranged a call between his dad and him. It was a surprise to Mayers.
Yep.
And I thought that was a very nice touch. And speaking of nice touches, I was thinking, man, if I ever accomplish anything successful, I need Ian Bishop to commentate on that. Like, I need that running commentary.
I saw your tweet on that. Yeah.
I just love his. He didn't do a remember the name for Mayers, but I think it was definitely like he would have really deserved it for that knock.
Yeah, and just to add to that history of chases, we might be looking at another awesome chase by South Africa, who are in a very strong position against Pakistan going to day
Right.
5. So
Yeah.
that's something to look forward to.
Yeah, that'll be exciting.
No, it's a big thing to chase down these totals in Asia in the fourth innings as an away team, right? It's very difficult. And that's why it's a big thing, because the West Indies team, as you said, is a B team or even a C team, and they've come and they performed so well and they won. So it's definitely like, I just like to watch good test cricket and everyone doing well. Ideally, I'd like to have like 20
Yep.
test teams doing well, competing
Agreed.
well. So it's very heartening for everyone to watch.
Well, that's it for this episode of The Last Wicket. Please do join us again next week as we discuss a recent article on The Wire about how the younger Indian cricket stars are the new face of modern India. We will also be having a special IPL-themed segment, so don't miss that. Do subscribe to this podcast to be notified of new episodes, follow us on your social media feeds, and do spread the word about this show. For more details, please visit our website at thelastwicket.com. There you will find all the links to the articles and the data we referred to in today's episode. Once again, thank you for listening, and we hope you come back for more. From all of us here at The Last Wicket, have a great week.